Our speaker is called Marijn, and he works as an independent software consultant for corporate startups and scale-ups within Europe. He studied business administration, which in his card says it's boring but useful, and moonlighted as a freelance software engineer, which also in his card says limited impact and lots of fun. After getting stung by the startup bug, he founded a software as a service business in which he was involved for the next 6 years, lots of impact and limited private life. This experience led him to having the experience that he now shares with his customers in making software that propels organizations forward. Besides developing tools such as Chameleon that augment the software delivery processes which makes teams more effective, he also laughs at his own jokes for reasons unknown, because they typically aren't funny. I mean, we will see about that. So let's welcome to the stage, Marijn.
Hello everyone. Practical strategy for digital organizations, or how to relate your objectives and key results to your technical real estate. At the end of this presentation, you'll be able to produce a Wardley map for the existing objectives and key results of your company. Now, if you aren't using OKRs yet, then you might be able to find objectives that are worthwhile to pursue using Wardley Maps. Now, when you map, you graph your dependencies. And if you do this with a diverse group of people from various disciplines, then you'll be able to articulate why some of your higher level objectives are limited by constraints within your value chain and the systems that support it. Now, with that newfound situational awareness, you're going to be far more effective at implementing your strategy. So my job is done here today. If you're as excited as I am about trying these ideas in your own environment. Now, perhaps you came here today because you want to hear everything about objectives and key results. But I'm not just going to be talking about objectives and key results. Maybe you want to hear everything there is to know about Wardley Maps, but I'm not just going to talk about Wardley Maps. If you want a real in-depth conversation about that, come see me at the end of this presentation, because during this presentation I'm really going to focus on combining these two things together. But rest assured, I'll cover the basics, so if you don't know, you're going to be just fine. Now, unfortunately for you, I'll do this using corny visual metaphors. So, my name is Marijn Huizendveld, and I work for scale-ups, the leadership teams of scale-ups, to help them accomplish more with the people that work in their organization. And typically, my clients ask me a question along the lines of, what can we do to remain effective now that we've significantly increased our headcount? We used to get so much done when we were just with 10 people, and now we're with 40, and we seem to not be able to get anything done. So a while ago, I was at a conference like this, and somebody asked me at what level I operate when I work with my client. Now, I found it an interesting question, but also a somewhat funny one, because it assumes that we have a shared understanding of what levels exist. So I told this person that I think you have to operate at 3 different levels to be successful in implementing meaningful change in big organizations like scale-ups. First of all, we need to work on the skills of people, right? We need to work on their tactical ability, the ability to affect change in their environment. And, well, we're at a software conference, right? A technology conference, specifically for product in this case. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to have a team that can listen to what the market is saying and distill useful information from that and translate that into a story of like what we're trying to accomplish. It means that we need to have a team that is able to hide the complexity of old systems behind interfaces so that we don't tie the fate of our product to that of another. It means that we need to have teams that can test the system in such a way that when we want to evolve our products, it's not the technology that is holding us back, but it's actually the technology that allows us to change these systems. So let's say that the team has these skills and maybe a few more. They're able to march very effectively, but perhaps they're headed off in the wrong direction and are walking off a cliff. So you need more than just the ability to do something, right? You need a sense of direction. You need a bit of guidance. You need a North Star. And that is what strategy can provide us, right? Strategy can help us inform where we're headed and why we're headed that way, and also why we haven't chosen to go somewhere else instead. But even if we have that sense of direction, and even if we have people that can act on that, we might not always have enough, right? Because we need to also organize effectively around that so that we can turn tactical successes into strategic successes. So we also need to work at an operational level, making sure that not one team is heading off in that direction to find a solution for a problem and another team in that direction, and that as a consequence, as an organization, we remain at a standstill. So we have to operate at 3 different levels: the tactical, the strategic, and the operational. So the story that I'll be sharing with you today is a story of me playing around with the strategy that was handed to me by a client and fiddling around with it and trying to make sense of it because I couldn't at the time. And so it's a real story, but it's adjusted in the details here and there because, well, NDAs and all that. So let's get started. Strategy. It's a big word, right? Gets used a lot. But what does it really mean to me? Well, imagine that you're on the road to success, right? We're cruising along with our team, and at some point during our journey, somebody in the team shouts, "Hey, stop! I think I saw a pot of gold." Now, what do? Do we continue down this road to success because what is waiting for us at the end of the road is a lot more grand than this mere pot of gold that we might have seen now? Or is this perhaps the point where we have to pivot? Strategy allows us to interpret the events that happen around us, and through that interpretation understand which events are things to be taken very serious and which events we have to count as mere distractions. Strategy is about observing the landscape and understanding how it's changing and using whatever resources we have, how little or many they may be, to maximize your chances of success. And that's what Simon Wardley, how he classifies strategy. So the organization that I was working with used objectives and key results as their strategic lens. Right? And so objectives and key results stands for, well, objective, a big audacious goal that gets people jumping out of bed in the morning, right? This is something why people are really excited to work for this organization. And the key results, oh. Yes, okay. There we are. The key results are the metrics, the quantifiable metrics that informs us that we have in fact achieved our objective. So our objective is something aspirational, it is qualitative, it's not necessarily measurable, but the key results are the indicators that will inform us when we have achieved the objective. Now, there is actually a silent H in OKRs. It should have been called OKR HMS, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue that nicely. This is, I think, once originally said by Christina Botke, but I honestly don't know for sure. But the H stands for health metrics. And health metrics are the metrics that inform us that we're burning bridges that we don't want to be burning while we're chasing our objective. And you can imagine that if you give a team an objective and you say, here's the key results, the measurements that have to go up or down, and you can do whatever you want to make them go up or down, then as a consequence of that, we might go a bit too far, right? So maybe we're sacrificing profitability because we want to grow our user base, right? So health metrics are metrics that inform us that we're sacrificing assets that we don't want to be sacrificing. And that's important because you can mess up many times trying to achieve your goals, but you can mess up your health only once, right? If you've messed it up, it's gone. It's difficult to recoup. So let's look at an objective. finish the Phoenix project. What do you think? Is this a good objective? I see some heads shaking. Exactly. This is not a great objective. And the reason for it is about an outcome, not about an output. Finish the Phoenix project is have finished this thing, produce this output, add this feature. And those are output-oriented objectives, and they don't help the team because we've already prescribed how the team is supposed to do their job. So let's imagine for a moment that we're working for an organization that tries to compete with the likes of these. Gorillas, Getir, Flink. These are companies that deliver groceries within 10-minute time frame at your doorstep in many big European cities these days. And so we've worked with our team to figure out what is the objective that we are getting excited about when we are launching in a new market, right? And we've organized a workshop, and what we've decided on is to say we want to catapult ourselves into the market for everyday items. This is what gets the people that have joined our team very excited. They're looking forward to making that change happen every day. And so this is the language that we're using within the team to talk about the goals that we're trying to achieve. Now let's look at some example key results. First, a revenue of 100,000 euros within 30 days after launch. It's measurable. It has a clear time frame attached to it. And 15% of customers refer friends and family. Right? How do we want to grow this business? How don't we just want to make an initial launch, but how are we also going to make sure that we're actually growing this business? And 250 reviews, at least, of which 80% is 4 out of 5 stars or higher. Right? So how are we going to make sure that the perception of the brand is also in order? Right? Now, when we are coming up with these key results, it's kind of like grading your own exam, right? So we make an agreement and we say, all right, you're going to be grading your own exams. And we have to watch out that it's not like, I see, you've passed all your exams. We have to be really honest with ourselves whether what we're measuring and how we're measuring is actually really informing that we have achieved the objective. Not all metrics in our organizations are really what they say they are. Not all metrics are suitable for measuring what we're trying to measure. And that's why it's important to be transparent about what we're doing towards the rest of the organization so that people can challenge how we want to measure our success. So that they can say, yeah, I don't think that key performance indicator is really the thing that you want to be using here as a key result. Let's look at some health metrics exemplaries. Team happiness, stable at 3 out of 3. We've spent an awful amount of money to obtain these people, to have them join our team. So we want to make sure that these talented people are actually staying with us, right? We don't want to be burning them up. We want to make sure that the cost of acquisition of any individual order is not exceeding the average order profit, because that's effectively giving away free groceries. Of course, people are going to take that. And we want to make sure that the cash flow in exceeds the cash flow out, because the only reason why companies go out of business is because they run out of money. So there are some common pitfalls with objectives and key results. And I'm going to name just 5 of them, because I want to make sure that you're not going to be a victim of them. So first of all, there is set and forget. So we've organized a workshop. We've gotten people very excited about the notion of using objectives and key results. And as a consequence of that, everybody is happy. We've found key results that really will measure success. We've settled on the health metrics. And then the first Monday comes around and everybody goes back to their regular day work. And then another few Mondays roll around, and all of a sudden, it's the end of the time period that we have allowed ourselves for our objectives and key results, and we wonder why we haven't made any of those, right? So you can't just set the goal. You also have to make sure that there's a process in place to ensure that you're acting on what you have committed yourself to. So typically, the time frame that is used for objectives and key results is about 3 months. But nothing says that it needs to be that long or that it needs to be that short. So another common problem is being overly ambitious. So like was mentioned when I was introduced, I was once part of a startup, and we were quite often not aiming for the moon, but we were aiming for Mars. And as a consequence of that, we never really made the goals that we set ourselves out for. And that can be very discouraging. At some point in time, you do need to have a success, a victory, to be like, yes, we did it. And so let's leave aiming for Mars to Elon Musk. Let's try to just stick with aiming for the moon. Now, the opposite also happens, and that's a lack of ambition. So in some organizations, we discourage failure to such an extent, and we punish it, that no wonder people are not going to try, right? So if people are always being confronted with something not going according to plan in a very negative way, we shouldn't be surprised that they aren't going to aim for more ambitious goals, right? So we have a hand in this ourselves. Then there is the lack of autonomy. So let's say that we're setting out those objectives and key results in a workshop, and we have to do this with people that understand the business very well. Now the problem is, we're doing it with people that understand the business very well. And so these people will have ideas on how to implement things. They'll have ideas on what we should be doing. And they might be saying, we should really do X, or we should really do that. And as a consequence of that, we rob the team of the autonomy to make those decisions themselves, to figure out what they think they can do within their influence of, within their circle of influence to achieve the objective. So a lack of autonomy is a common pitfall. And then finally, not really having a business goal. There are many initiatives that are very worthwhile to pursue, but they are not necessarily business goals, right? I work a lot with technology organizations, right? They want to replace one piece of technology with another. Might be a useful thing to do, but it's not a business goal. No one is going to choose for us because we now have some other technology powering our system, right? So one way to deal with these common pitfalls is by having a status email. And obviously, if you're using a different medium like Slack, the concept is the same. It's a simple email that you're going to be sending out every week to anyone who's interested in the organization. And you're going to say, here's the objective that we have, and it's going to be clearly scannable. You're going to say, we're about 5 out of 10 sure that we're going to make the objective, or we're 7 out of 10 sure that we're going to make the objective, or 3 out of 10. And you use a bit of visual coloring to make sure that it's easy to scan. And you tell what current week's priorities have been and what next week's priorities are going to be, and a little bit of a background, a short bit of notes, a few sentences. Don't use this for novel writing practice. And what can happen is people can start to see what you're doing, and they can help you get unstuck. Now, like I said, you have to send this to anyone in the organization that wants to receive it. And this is going to get you into trouble. Now, I speak from experience because I was once sending this to everyone that wanted to have it, and that one of those persons was the head of sales. And he had just been fighting a battle for a budget for a Salesforce implementation. And it turned out that, we also had a budget, and that budget was exactly the amount that he needed for what he wanted. And so he started to challenge whether or not this initiative was even worthwhile to pursue. Now, in this particular instance, that person was very aggressive, and it wasn't a fun experience for the team. So that wasn't a particularly enjoyable experience. However, in principle, I welcome it. It is good to have a conversation like that. It is good to get challenged by people outside of our departments on, is this really the way we should be allocating our resources? So I love OKRs when done right. And done right means that the objective inspires and aims for the moon. We frequently check in by sending out a status email, and we have key results that truly measure success, and we make sure that we don't burn up anything valuable by having health metrics. So back to my client. Here it is. Our strategy for the current quarter and the next quarter. It's a 17-sheet long presentation, font size 9, barely any pictures. Has anyone seen one of those? And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I thought, you know what? Here's what we do with it. No, not like that. Here, like this. If you look at things from a different angle, then it usually provides valuable insights. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to use something that I'd been in touch with. But before I talk about that, I have a question for you. Have you ever walked around here in Budapest and your phone was empty and a tourist came up to you and they said, "Excuse me, can you tell me the way to Gellert Bath?" And you're like, all right, yeah, it's so the end of this block, then to the left, 3 streets down, cross the river, and then to the right. And they walk away, and you already start to feel guilty, right? Because you're like, or was it the second to the left? So stories are not really a good format to gain situational awareness, right? But this organization shared a very long story about their OKRs, and it was very difficult to comprehend. And the problem with stories in growing organizations is we have to tell the story over and over and over again. We can't really recycle it, right? Because people will have questions, and every time it's a new conversation. That doesn't really scale well. So what to do instead? Well, tell me, you have to go somewhere. What are the first apps that you open on your smartphone? Google Maps? What else? Tinder? What? Instagram? All right. So I am from the Netherlands, and it quite often rains there. So it's useful to also check the weather, right? Whether or not going by foot or by bike is actually a smart mode of transportation. So these apps and others, right, they give you situational awareness, right? They give you a view on the current landscape and whether or not your strategy makes sense. So let's look at a map for a second. This is a map of Greece, and what we see here overlaid on it is the model of a map. A map is visual, right? It immediately starts to paint a picture for us. It has context, right? It's not a map of the entire world. It's a map of a particular part of Greece at a particular point in time in the context of a specific battle, actually. Now we have position on the map, right? I can point here at things, and that means that I am pointing at some place on the landscape. And we can have that because we have something called consistency of movement, because everything is positioned in relationship towards of the anchor. The anchor in most geographical maps is the magnetic north, right? We see it here in the top right corner, and in most geographical maps these days it's left out because it's implied, but that's how positioning in a map works. And then we have movement, right? Because we have position, we can talk about movement. So those are the red arrows, right? And we have components, right? What type of components do we see here? Well, we see cities, land masses, water, mountains, crosses, so various things. So this is the model of a map, and Simon Wardley thought, what could a map like this, with attributes like this, look like for business? And so he said, you know what, we need to start with one particular thing, and that's the anchor. And the anchor in a Wardley map is the user. And that's based on the principle that you must know who your users are. For who are you doing it? Like, to whom are you delivering value, right? So a map starts with a user. And the second thing is, we have to focus on the user need. What is it that these users need to get done? So let's go through an exercise. Think about that company that is competing with Getir, Flink, and Gorillas. Let's call it Shoppy Floppy. And the customer of Shoppy Floppy is the lazy person, the couch potato who wants to sit at home, watch Netflix and chill, right? And eat a bucket of ice cream to it. So what do they need? Well, they need to consume everyday items. And what do they need in order to get that? Well, they need urgency and they need the Shoppy Floppy offering. Right? If there wasn't any urgency, if they didn't need to have the bucket of Ben & Jerry's right now, they would just go to a regular grocery store. They would just order it online, right? But they need it right now. So they need the Shoppy Floppy offering and they need urgency. Well, what do we need for that? Well, we need our catalog. And what do we need for that? Well, we need everyday items. And what do we need for that? Well, we need pricing. And for that, we need suppliers. So we're starting at the top with the user, and then with the user needs, and then we're drilling our way down into the value chain until we're getting to components where it doesn't really matter anymore whether we have one or the other, right? The end user doesn't really care whether the bucket of Ben & Jerry came from one supplier or the other, right? To them, it's become indifferent. So the further you're away from the end user, the less they're able to perceive the difference. All right, so let's talk about something else. Simon Wardley made an observation, it's like everything in a competitive market space evolves. So imagine it's the 60s and we're a fly on the wall at Bell Laboratories and somebody comes with a thing the size of a fridge driving into the boardroom and he parks it in the middle and takes a cigarette out of their mouth and says, here it is, a mobile phone. And the people in the boardroom go like, wait, what? And they look at it, it's like held together by rope and tape, and it looks appalling, but there are key codes on it, and if they punch them, they can actually call their mother. So it works, right? It demonstrates the concept. It's not connected to the landline, but it's not a sellable product, right? So this is the genesis of new technology, right? Wow, can we do that as humanity? But who's going to buy this, right? What's the market for it? Now roll forward 10 years, it's the 70s, and this same company is producing custom mobile phones for the military, for generals to call with one another. I don't know if they're going to be talking strategy or beers, but whatever. And another 10 years roll by, and it's the 80s, and every Wall Street trader or, I had an uncle that was carrying around one of those suitcases, basically. He's like, yeah, I have a mobile phone, sitting on the terrace, like being very cool about it. And then another 10 years go by, and it's now the 90s, right? And it's become so ubiquitous that everyone nearly has a mobile phone in their pockets, right? So what you see is that things evolve, right? From the genesis to custom build, where we're building it once for one user, but if another customer would come along for it, we'd have to do it all over again, to a productized version. And from that productized version, we have unique selling points against other competitors, to eventually a commoditized version where people don't care whether they're using one supplier or another. The product has become so standardized, people have very strong expectations of it. So let's put things on an axis of evolution. There we go. So do you notice anything about this map? So on the left is Genesis, and then we have custom build, and then we have product, and then we have commodity. And remember, things that are further away from the user are less, they can perceive them less well. So the funny thing about Wardley Maps is you don't necessarily need to understand the domain in order to start to ask difficult questions. And the difficult question that you can ask here is like, pricing, far away from the user, what's it doing in custom build? What value can it add there? The user can barely perceive it. And so, regardless of how well we understand the intricacies, we can start to apply general rules, heuristics, to talk about whether or not this picture makes sense and what we would possibly want to change about it. See that everyday items things? That's actually a bunch of things, right? So we're experimenting with different products, right? We have eggs and coffee, which are obviously super accepted products. And then we have other things. This is a map from 2020, right? So COVID tests, we just started to try them out in one branch and see if people would actually be ordering them. And we're talking to the same provider of those tests. They actually also sell HIV tests, whether or not we maybe want to do a pilot with them. So you can start to visualize various things, various individual products going through there. So how to make a map? Frame the purpose. What are we trying to achieve as an organization? Determine what your scope is. And then identify the user, right? Who is the user? And then ask yourself, what are their needs? And don't confuse the needs with the wants, right? The user wants a faster horse, but they need a car. And then you start to identify the component, right? By asking ... needs. And so you can ask, what do I need for having that product? And then finally, once you have that, you can put the components on the chain of evolution and you can see where they are. So what's the benefit of all this? Well, we can start to make our assumptions explicit. And people can start to challenge the strategy. We can start to talk about if that's really the user need that we should be focusing on, or if that's really the best way to go about it. And we can start to ask a question like, why here over there? Why should we invest in this part of the organization and not over here? We can also imagine that depending on where you are, if you're coming up with various new things, Genesis, that's where we need Gyro Gearloose, right? The inventor from Donald Duck. Whereas in the commodity space, where we have to standardize things, we need to have people working in the teams that like to work with that really like to optimize things, right? So depending on where you are on the map, you need a different set of attitudes and a different set of people to work on them. And as a consequence of that, we can also ask, what is the right process to use? If we're in the Genesis side of things, we're probably not going to be very helped a lot by using a Scrum process, because that's still way too restrictive. We just need to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Whereas when we're in the commodity space, that's where something like Scrum might even be a little not restrictive enough. By making that map, right, we can start to visualize risk and impact. And that is a big benefit. All right. So, Wardley Maps, OKRs, but what about combining them? So one of the things that we can start to do is we can put ourselves on the map, because we're a user too, right? So Shoppy Floppy, we're in the top left there. We're in Genesis, because we are burning up VC money like no one else has ever before. And we want to catapult ourselves into the market, so that need that is in custom build, right? Because every time we're entering a market, we're figuring out how we do that. I actually have scale-up customers who talk about provisioning markets. They've productized that whole process. So you can put a need also in one of those corresponding quadrants. So what is one of the things that we're trying to do? Well, we want to achieve a high average order value. This is one of our key results. So I can visualize that. And I can visualize that we have a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that the perception of value of our product is too low. People think that we're too expensive. That's basically what they're saying is. And so what we're writing down there is we have to do something with that perception of value. And one way we want to do that is we want to improve our price communication. So I'm putting that on the map as well. And price communication is pretty standardized, right? It's one of the things that you can do is something called strike-through pricing, where you show it's normally $10.99, now it's $8.99. And that actually depends on one of the system components that we have, the pricing components, something that we have built custom ourselves. It's not a marvelous piece of engineering. It's actually pretty difficult to change something in there. And now because we have visualized how we intend to achieve a particular objective, and what the hypothesis is that drove all of that, and how we intend to do it, and how we're linking it to our technology, someone in the organization can say, I understand what you're trying to do here, but you haven't seen the pricing service. We don't want to be touching it. It's too risky. The rest of the business would be too affected if we are making a mistake there. But seeing what you're trying to do here with the perception of value, what I propose is that we do this other thing instead. Right? So by making it visual and by linking up what we're trying to achieve with the constraints in our landscape, we can bridge those two worlds and we can work collectively on finding solutions. One of the things that we can also start to do is we can start to visualize how our hypothesis is getting accepted, right? So if we notice that perception of value, that the hypothesis that we had on that is actually correct, we can slowly start to move it towards the right-hand side of the map. So we can also start to visualize how things are getting better. And we can also visualize inertia. So the fact that we're trying to make a change, but that the organization isn't necessarily helping us with that. So that's that little black block on the top of that red dotted line. Now, maybe if you think about a hypothesis, it feels a bit weird to say Genesis, custom build, product, or commodity. You can just use different labels. So we can say we have a novel hypothesis, it's divergent, convergent, and then it's accepted. Whatever works for you. So, combining OKRs and Wardley Maps, departments, tribes, and teams can be the anchor of the map, right? We can put them on the map. And if we do that, then the objectives that we have can be the needs of that anchor, right? They can be put below. And the hypothesis that drives one of that we think we want to prove or disprove can be something that we visualize as a component or as a set of components below. And as proof accumulates, the hypothesis moves to the right. So we can use this to communicate towards the rest of the organization. And we can visualize any inertia that we're experiencing that keeps us from reaching the objective. And the map acts as a vehicle to point out organizational bias. Why do we have a custom-built pricing engine to begin with if we can maybe buy it as a product in the market? Now, don't take what everyone says at a conference at face value. That's a great quote by Dennis Doman. So this is what the real thing looked like, albeit somewhat NDA compatible. And you can see that there are a lot more moving parts than the simplified example that I gave you. But the thing is, producing this map allowed me to ask some questions. And those you see in the top left there. Those are all the red sticky notes. And some of them got answers, and some of them did not. Now, in this particular case, it wasn't actually the problem wasn't necessarily even in the objectives themselves. It was far more in the competitive landscape. And in the end, it turned out that it was very difficult for this organization to make their dream come true. And it didn't have to do that much with the objectives themselves. But for me, it was apparent when I made this map that that was the problem. And it was therefore also very clear that I was not going to be investing that much energy and attention in this project because it just didn't make that much sense. So not always, when you're going to visualize things, it's going to be a story of a fairy tale, right? It's not going to always be wonderful. But nevertheless, doing an activity like this can help you reach those conclusions. So how does this relate to product design? Well, mapping will help us build up a common language. What are those components, right? And if we use that language throughout the rest of the communication with our team and with the rest of the organization, then we can really benefit from that because we'll start to talk in terms of the same concepts. Mapping will also help us to think in abstractions, right? To not have everything coupled to each other, but to think in terms of abstractions that help us solve our problems. And mapping will force us to focus on the user need, because we have to start with it. There's no way to fool around with it without doing that. And finally, mapping will help us differentiate our approach, right? If we're doing something in the genesis area of the map, we need a different approach than where we're in the commodity side of things. So looking back and into the future, how to make OKRs work? Have an objective that inspires and aims for the moon. Measure key results that truly indicate success. And make sure that you frequently evaluate the amount of progress that you're making or the lack thereof, right? And combine OKRs and Wardley Maps to produce a single picture that can articulate both your business strategy and the technical landscape that you're operating in. Uncover assumptions that are below your hypothesis, right? And make sure that you can have people be able to challenge the strategy that you are suggesting. It helps you to unify the language between tech and non-tech roles, and it helps you to share knowledge within the organization. But most of all, it helps you to clarify the preference of one objective over all of the other alternatives, right? You can put all of them on the map, you can talk about them, and then you can say, this is what we're doing. This is what we're believing in. So I want to thank a few people because this presentation would not have been the same without them. Simon Wardley for Wardley Maps, Christina Wodke for all of her wonderful material on objectives and key results, Martin, Teun, and Marking Amsterdam, and of course Verena. Did you like this presentation? Then tell your friends, tell your boss, and tell the internet. I wish you a very pleasant conference. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. We have one question.
Yeah.
When you work for a large enterprise, does it make sense to build multiple Wardley maps for different parts of the product, or have everyone on a complex map?
That's a great question, and I'd say the answer is actually both, because it depends on who the user of the map is going to be, right? So for the individual departments, they probably want to have a map of their own ecosystem, so to say. But for people that are obviously operating at the level above that, for them it's useful to have a map of the bigger picture. And you can use the smaller maps to produce the bigger one and the other way around. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.